Okay, fantastic. Thank you ever so much, guys. Um, with such a small audience, you're going to get lots of interactive participation today, so apologies for this. But for those of you who've turned up, thank you very much. My name's Ellis Fincham. As you may have guessed, not from Belgium, from the southwest of England, so the bit of England that really voted for Brexit, but I assure you I didn't do that. So, I'm actually from a place called Cheltenham. If any of you are familiar with Banksy, a little bit, this is just down the road from me. So the reason behind it, guys in trench coats with listening devices, is in Cheltenham we have the government communication headquarters for the UK. So this was him having a bit of a swipe at the guys down the road at the donut. So I myself never worked there. So although if I was a spy, I'd have to say that, wouldn't I? Morning, Seb. How are you? But I have worked around the industry for, longer than I care to mention, with Message Labs first and foremost, who were the world's first cloud security company. I don't know if you guys remember those. They got bought by Symantec in about 2008. And then I worked for Symantec for a bit. Worked for McAfee in their Nitro bit when they bought a SIEM. And then eventually ended up at Rapid7 because my old boss came across and phoned me up one Sunday afternoon and said, you know all the lies we're telling about how to deal with SIM in McAfee? These guys are doing it. So he dragged me in and I had a chat with one of the technical people, and lo and behold, they were doing it. So I took a position and we've not looked back since. I've been here about 7 years. I look after our XDR practice here in EMEA. So our managed service that we wrap around our tools, but also our SIEM platform, our automation platform, and our threat intelligence platform. And I'm going to talk a bit today really around what a lot of things that we're seeing in the marketplace around cyber insurance. It seems to be becoming a much bigger talking point than it was maybe 2 years ago. And the people in that marketplace are behaving differently than when they entered it, a few years ago. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit around kind of the things that we're seeing make an impact with cyber insurers in terms of keeping you guys safe and keeping your businesses safe. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing at Rapid7, and hopefully you'll kind of get a view of what that all looks like when we tie it together. But first and foremost, this is probably not news to you guys. This is a difficult problem to solve. Detection and response is not something that we're going to deal with kind of overnight. And if I had my way, I would change the focus of all of our security teams away from sort of compliance and zero trust and regulatory kind of obligations, and focus them in on the things that are actually happening. We know there are escalating threats out there, but they're not unmanageable. If I said to you guys there were 1 million playbooks out there for attackers, would you agree with me, or would you think that I was miles away? If I said thousands, would we still be miles away? Do you want to know the truth? And anyone who can guess it gets a lovely pair of Rapid7 socks. They go well with any brand of trainers. The actual amount of active workbooks at any one time globally is about 250. So, if you look at the APT groups and, the state-sponsored stuff that's happening out there, there's probably 150 of those guys active at any one time. Now, there may be thousands of detections that we have to put in place as organizations in order to catch them. But realistically, you're only having to defend yourself against probably 150 active groups, and then probably a similar amount of cyber activists, cyber mischief makers, those types of guys. So it is difficult. There is a skills gap. There is less people out here than we want to be able to do this with. But the reality is we're probably trying to defend our organizations against stuff that doesn't really matter and is unlikely to happen to our organizations on a day-to-day basis. And I want to talk about kind of what that means when we look at cyber insurance. And I've gone through a number of publications, so you don't have to. The Verizon Data Breach Report, a UK NCSC report, which is a government-issued report that we push out in the UK, And I think this is a really useful piece of research as well. So Hiscox are a global insurer, and every year for the last 6 years or so, they've put out this cyber readiness report. And that cyber readiness report is feedback from the actual incidents that they've had to deal with as organizations under their care. So it's a real kind of view from the street, as it were, of actual attacks that have happened and payouts that they've had to make. So I pulled a few stats from each of them, but if you've got time, they're all really interesting reads in terms of understanding the cyber landscape and what's going on out there. But the market is changing. That cyber insurance market that we had probably 5 years ago doesn't exist anymore. Tiny premiums for unlimited cover. The cyber insurance market has got wise to that. They know that they've basically been insuring unlimited risk for tiny premiums and not getting the return that they want. And we have to remember, at the end of the day, these guys are businesses, right? So they're doing all of their research to try and look and find out what's going on. And what we've seen is actually there's a tripling of premiums out in the marketplace at the moment. So if you see someone looking for £500,000 worth of £5 million worth of cyber cover, you're probably going to be looking at a premium of around £50,000 to £60,000 now, whereas 2-3 years ago, that was £25,000. We're also seeing cyber insurers start to exclude certain eventualities from their policies. And the worrying one for me on this is we're starting to see them exclude things like state-sponsored attacks. Now that's fine if you take it at a conceptual level. Okay, I probably can't build a defense network that defends me from state-sponsored attacks. But if you look at most of the tools that the commercial cyber criminals out there are using, the activists, they all trace back in some way, shape, or form to state-sponsored research, right? We look at WannaCry in 2015. That was it's a state-sponsored attack that got out of hand, right? If we look at things like the Hafnium group that were targeting Exchange, that technology was from research that we'd seen happening in the Chinese state-sponsored attackers. Even down to things like, I've forgotten the name of the company that was targeted, but it was a Linux distro, effectively, where they were looking to understand what was going on within that distro, and they wanted to gain telemetry from it. It took them 4 years to get, to do the whole confidence trick of getting enough collateral, enough credence within that environment to actually get in and do the quality checks. And by the time they did that, they were able to then push malicious software out to endpoints, and it was only because of the curiosity of one researcher that meant that these things were stopped. So when they make statements like, we're going to exclude state-sponsored attacks from our policies, it really gives them a get-out-of-jail-free card, that if they want to, they can probably attribute your attack to a state-sponsored event, and therefore we don't need to pay out for you. And I think that's really difficult to justify to boards when we're saying, right, we've bought a cyber insurance premium, but it excludes this. When you couple that with the fact that we're seeing research coming out from our ransomware teams internally that are saying, actually, people with insurance policies are generally paying out slightly higher ransomware payments than people who don't. And it makes sense when you start to think about it, because the way that we see ransomware attackers interacting with clients now is a much more customer service focused approach. Yes, you've been ransomed, but we're here to help you to get over your ransomware attack. And this is, these are the Lockbits and of the world talking to their customers in this way. And often when they have those conversations with them, hey, you've been ransomware, we'd like to help you get over this, they start to actually talk about their policies. So one of the things we've seen actors going in doing is, I want to go in, I want to get something that is high value to them. So it might be IP, it might be financial results, something that I don't have to encrypt machines to do in order to extract ransom, but also going and finding their insurance policy details and extracting them out of their environments so that they can come back to these people and say, hey, we know your ransomware, it's really awkward, but we've had a look at your insurance policy and actually it pays out X for ransomware incidents. So we're only asking you for that. And that creates a frictionless way for them to get money out of organizations because the insurance premiums, the insurance payouts are styled as such. Now, that's a very difficult thing to defend when we start to talk about data and telemetry that gives us that view into what's happening. But it makes sense that that insurers are starting to scale their premiums in line with your cyber hygiene. And what I mean by that is we're seeing organizations who are doing the right things that they're asking, and it's not rocket science that they're asking for here, really. They're asking for things like multi-factor authentication. They're asking for 24/7 monitoring of your environment. They're asking for things like a vulnerability management program that actually is operational rather than just spitting out a spreadsheet once a year. And if they can evidence doing this, you as organizations can evidence doing this, then we get to a point where the premium is a lot lower. When that premium is at that point for a lot of businesses, they start to have the discussion internally as to, is this something that we need, or is this something that we could use these funds elsewhere to help us have better cyber hygiene? And I think from our point of view within Rapid7 is actually both things are applicable. Cyber insurance is a useful tool for most organizations, especially when we're in situations like incident response where we want to call on someone, we want some resource in the room to help us. So there's a balancing act, right? Because you've still got to go and do the things that they're asking you to do. And if I take us as an example for last year, so we are an MDR provider. That's the T-shirt, as you may have guessed from the T-shirt. We've got about 2,500 customers globally. We look after about 3 million endpoints, somewhere in the region of that. We were breached last year across our customer base about 62 times. Major incidents I'm talking about here. So this is not, hey, we just need you to reset the password on that account. This is, hey, we're seeing live data being exfiltrated from your organization, or we're seeing a state-sponsored actor camping in your environment, those types of things. And we had a look back through our initial access methods from last year and from 2022 to comparing it to 2023, and it paints a reasonably similar picture. Multi-factor authentication is the largest initial access vector for most of our attacks. And for insurance companies, when they're saying to, this feeds into their narrative, right? Hey, you don't do MFA well, so therefore we won't insure you. But the reality is here, for those of you who are out in the field practicing, you're never going to get MFA 100% installed, right? You're going to have service accounts in your environment. You're going to have non-human accounts that never interact with anybody, that don't have MFA on them. And that's exactly what most of these attacks are targeting. So when you see insurance firms coming to you and saying, hey guys, you've got to have 100% coverage, we need to start having that conversation because they're not security professionals. They just see it as a metric, a lever in order to make you less susceptible to an attack. And we need to start having those conversations of, actually guys, we can't do this 100%, but we can do it to all of the accounts that we feel that we should be doing it to. Vulnerability exploitation is still really high on the radar, down from last year. But there were a couple of incidents in 2022, namely Log4j, that drove that up. But what we are seeing is the percentage of these that are 0-day is tiny. What we're actually seeing is a lot of legacy vulnerabilities, a lot of misconfigurations that are allowing attackers access to those environments. Now, my personal preference here is, automate that. But I know a lot of organizations have a lot of well-founded anxiety around automating updates to machines. But if you do, if you look at it as an attack, an initial vector of attack, we should be able to get that number down quite considerably by not affecting systems that are necessarily going to generate revenue for you, or are extremely important to your organization. I think something like 75% of vulnerabilities will be patched without any impact to the end user, but we don't have any kind of way of understanding which ones are more important than others. We often are starting with a list of one and working way through to 10,000. Phishing payloads still gave us a huge amount of breaches last year. Again, if you are still researching individual phishing emails as they come through to you and you haven't automated that workflow, please do buy yourself some time and have a look at it. They're getting better, so no surprise that things like AI have started to fix language problems within phishing emails, have started to emulate tones of the peers within that network. So we're starting to see them become a lot more targeted, a lot more specific to what's going on. And then last bits and pieces, compromise prior to services, we don't know. They're people that we brought on that had some sort of attack in flight. Cloud misconfigurations is up 3% from last year. That's going to be a big one. I think cloud misconfigurations have the potential to become similar to the vulnerabilities that we're seeing in our environments, really. And I think if we don't get our handle on really looking into how we configure cloud, how we configure identity and access management to cloud, how we keep up to date on what's happening in our environments, we could be in for a real threat there. I always kind of compare cloud's growth to the existing infrastructure that we have inside our organizations at the moment. I don't know about any of you, but I've inherited infrastructure that looks like a madman's knitting, because they've bought tools to serve a goal, or they've bought infrastructure to deliver a project, and nothing's coordinated, nothing's tied up. Everything is kind of got different rights, different tools, different confetti. And if we can get that down to if we can not do that within cloud, we're going to set ourselves up for a lot easier ride. And then finally, on the right-hand side, insider threat. So we saw one incident last year, effectively, that came from inside a network. But it reiterates that something we were talking about 2 minutes ago was, something we were talking about around user behavior analytics a few years ago is still relevant to our organizations. Having those things running is important. So how do we get better if we know that the insurance marketplace is telling us we've got to get better? If we know the facts from breaches tell us that we've still got to get better at these things, how do we do it? Well, we have a terrible slide that hasn't quite helped me out here, but don't worry. Detection, first and foremost, is complex. I don't know if you can read that just in the white that's in there, but obviously we had to switch slides at the last moment, and I do apologize, it obviously hasn't come through. Getting that right is really important, and a lot of people are looking for a silver bullet. An XDR platform, an EDR platform, an NDR platform, whatever it happens to be. They don't necessarily give you the full visibility that you need from your organization. If you look at what Gartner was saying sort of in 2020 around detection and response, they said 3 things. Endpoint telemetry is important, network telemetry is important, and log data is important. I'd say now that probably cloud data is also important. Things like CloudTrail, GuardDuty out of Amazon, Event Hub out of Azure, SCC out of GCP. Those types of things, that type of telemetry is important as well. But getting it into a standardized format where you can actually interrogate it from a user point of view, understanding whether Jane in accounts has suddenly got a new role or whether she's doing something malicious is important. But also being able to interrogate it from an attacker point of view. When I was talking earlier around those kind of 250 attack workbooks that are out there, that probably translates into about 10,000 detections in the platform, because that's the way that kind of the granularity that we need to get to in terms of detection. But we should be able to do that. and pull together a picture for our defenders to say, this is happening, and here is the telemetry across all of these vectors before we give it to them, rather than having them running around in and out of individual screens, trying to collect enough information to make a decision on this, on what's going on in their environment. If we can get to that point where we can query our data for attack techniques, we can query our data for user techniques, and we can kind of look to augment that, when we do find stuff, push it into prevention rather than just detecting the same thing again, then we start to get into a place where we are actually able to do something. And I still haven't got a picture, so that's really annoying because it's a really good picture as well. No, I'm kidding. We get into a point where we can take automated responses on our customers, on our infrastructure's behalf. And if we can do this well, we can probably stop a lot of work that is happening in our environments and help our insurance teams to be a little bit less anxious about what's going on in our environments. So if I just take you through a quick story from Rapid7's point of view, we 6 years ago wanted to implement automated responses in our SOC. So we wanted our SOC team to be able to say to our customers, hey, you've got a problem here. I've isolated the user, or I've isolated the asset from the network, but you can now go and investigate that without fear of it spreading across your environment. It sounded like a really simple request, but our legal team had an absolute fit about it because we were opening ourselves up to all sorts of legislation or suing or whatever it happens to be if we started taking off customer assets that were revenue generating or something like that. So we did a 6-month trial with a couple of customers that bought into it. And the feedback was we went from, on average, 6 hours to containing an endpoint. So what we would do is we would identify a critical alert within 15 minutes. We'd send it across to the customer. In the stuff that we send to the customer, we'd say, hey, can you click this link? And that will isolate the user, or that will isolate the user. It would, on average, take them 6 hours to click that link. Not because they're lazy. Generally, they were asleep, or they were in meetings or whatever, and it took a little bit of time. We took that back to our legal team and said, look, this is the actual effect here. If we don't do anything, it takes 6 hours. In 6 hours, on average, that's 200 assets that have been breached during this incident. Now, the fallout for you guys is you have to go and rebuild all of those machines, right? And you have to go and re-image them, rebuild the networks, all that type of stuff. So we managed to get sign-off, and we've been doing it for about 6 years now, and it really does help. We're now looking at how do we think about the next step? How do we start taking more information out of the attacks that we use and automate it into actions for our clients? And you guys should be looking at that as well for your teams. How do we make this work quicker? But we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back too much. Getting stuff sorted getting stuff isolated is the first step, I would say. What we need to then start thinking about is how do we automate the ability to take the data that we find, weaponize it really, the data that we find in attacks, and apply it to our organization. So, if you are identifying IP addresses, domains, file hashes, process start-stops that are integral to this attack, why aren't you taking that data and automatically applying it to your firewalls, your web gateways, your endpoints, that type of stuff? Because that will help you to then shrink your attack surface. If you can go the next stage and you can start to look externally at the attacks that have been targeted at you, start to attribute it to attack groups, then you can start to preempt what's happening. Hey, I've been targeted by Lockbit. This is the initial access they used. They used a known vulnerability in my Palo Alto firewall that it's been exploited. Great, but actually, they use 3 other techniques as initial access for their projects normally. So, what are those? Well, there's another vulnerability in Microsoft Exchange that they're doing, or they're doing some social engineering about VPs. And at least you can arm yourself with the information that will help you guys to stay safe, hopefully over a longer period of time. And if we can get that right, we can then start to give our pals in GRC a lot more information to work with. I often think about the SOC team as a slightly different entity, personality-wise, to the guys in GRC. They're often interested in stuff that's moving. They want to be doing flashy things, using the latest tools, having a really good time. And the way that I normally go about it is a rugby analogy that may not translate, but I'll try it anyway. England rugby are really good at winning games, but they don't win games very effectively through stylish play. They wouldn't be called out as like a stylish team. They are often winning through structure. So they drill really well. They have really well set piece training, and their fitness levels are generally very high. So they kind of win by being structured and waiting for the other team to get tired. If you look at New Zealand win through defense effectively. They are up in the faces of their competitors. They are knocking people back. They're picking up loose ball. They are, they're kind of winning through being proactive. And I think that sits really well for me in terms of the security community. The New Zealanders are the SOC team, right? They like to defend. They win through defense. England are the GRC part of our security business. And those two teams clash really badly at the moment. And I think if we can get them to work together, then we start to win. And we only do that through being proactive in our defense, looking at the information that is coming out of our systems and arming them with it, because they're having to run around a lot of the times and look for compliance. They're having to appease our cyber insurers. Let's make it easy for them. Let's do the things that we're supposed to be doing, and therefore their lives become easier because they're not having to create dashboards in order to visualize data for their compliance. They've got it because, that's useful information for us as a defender. Here you go. Here's how we present it to the SOC. And if we can get that right, I think we can really start to win across. I'm sorry, I'm running over by 2 minutes, so I'm going to have to turn up. But basically, it means that we've got command across the whole attack surface. And if you guys want to have a discussion with somebody, me included, we're on our booth just over there by Infinigate. We've got demos set up. We can give you a view of how we're helping teams to understand that attack lifecycle and translate that data into meaningful outputs for not just from a protection outcome point of view, but also from a GRC point of view. Thank you ever so much for your time today. It's nice to have such a small audience. And I've got a few freebies, and if you want to come across to the store, we do have some socks and bits and pieces, but I've got one very nice insulated mug if somebody can tell me how many attacks Rapid7 dealt with last year. I'll give you a clue, it was under 100. 73, nearly. So 63 at the back there. One insulated mug, sir. Congratulations. For the rest of you, I'm afraid it's socks. Thank you for your time today.